Hi Daniel. Another conversation, another Eye in Jerusalem, our new series on discussing really groundbreaking news going on in the heart of Jerusalem, where all the pioneers are moving to, streaming to, and building. One of the neighborhoods I want to discuss with you today is Kfar what the world calls Silwan, right? I guess the perfect place to start is the name.
Yes, names are very important. It creates, in many ways, the way the public perceives an area. Like for years, people have been saying, is it the West Bank or Judea and Samaria? Clearly, it was Judea and Samaria for a lot longer, not just in Jewish history, but in the annals of general history. Judea and Samaria, as opposed to the West Bank, which is something relatively new between, since '67. In any case, Silwan is another perfect example. I mean, I speak to hundreds, if not thousands of people per year, whether it be on tours or at meetings, and 99.9% of the people you speak to have heard of Silwan, yet nobody has heard of Kfar HaTemanim or Kfar Shiloach or the Yemenite village in the Shiloach. And before it was even an Arab neighborhood, Yemenite Jews were living in the area. So why should we today persist and keep on calling it Silwan? So the media keep on calling it Silwan, and that presents a certain picture. Oh, it must be an Arab neighborhood that's been there for who knows how many years, when in reality we're talking about initially a Jewish neighborhood from already 1882, before there was a single Arab there. So I like calling a spade, as my father Zichron Levrcha would say. And it's called Kfar Shiloach or Kfar Temanim in the Shiloach, either one. But yes, it's also called Silwan.
And Silwan really is a corruption of the original Hebrew name, right? Shiloach.
Right. Siloam, and then Shiloach. That's correct, because of the spring, the original, the only spring basically in Jerusalem, where so all these things happen in Jewish history. The connection to the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohen Gadol, the water, Simcha Perashoeva. Right. It's rather unique, and in fact that's one of the reasons why the Yemenite Jews, when they first came in 1882, that's where they wanted to be. It's true that it may not have had too much of a choice, because the Ashkenazim at the time didn't quite look after their brethren from Yemen the way they should have, and they lived in caves in the area for the first year or two, until from the Chavatzelet newspaper, Yisrael Dov Frumkin came to the plight of the Yemenite Jews. Phenomenal story. I mean, there are very few stories that come to the level of excitement in relation to the Yemenite Jews. It's really a summary of everything that we've been doing. The dream, the hopes, the aspirations of people wanting to come here. They believed that Mashiach was going to come in 1882, because it says in Shir HaShirim, even though I'll be cut climbing a date tree, I'll ultimately reach the dates. So in Hebrew that's Aleh Batamar, Taf Resh Membet. It's very funny, I've seen articles every so often written about who were the first to come on the first Aliyah. Was it the Yemenite Jews in 1882, or was it the first Aliyah in 1881-82? But it seems that they were both here around the same time. I will go up to reach the date. That's Aleh Batamar, as we said. They came, they trekked 2 families, 15 families, at its peak 144 Yemenite Jewish families living in the success of Tzionut, so to speak, of the return to the land, overlooking Ir David and Har HaBayit, something very special. That was the story then.
It's definitely the views, the advantage and the views from that area are tremendously powerful. The Arabs were not there, but they did have relationships, right, with the Arabs that were nearby. Actually, positive relationships.
The first Arabs that came there also came. See, once the Jews started turning up, and there's work, there's excitement, there's establishment. It's the story about the whole land of Israel. I mean, Mark Twain wrote that there was nothing here, and suddenly, the Jews come back. And yes, Arabs come from various countries around the Middle East, and they also come to this place where they see growth and life and money and a greater standard of living. So there were definitely Arabs living there already by the early, the turn of the century. There's no question. After the pogroms, there were a lot more Arabs that came to Hebron that caused a lot of problems, because they were very full of hate and violence. They were driven by Hajj Amin el-Husseini. But there's no question that some Arabs were quite happy to live in peace with the Jews who had started building up the land. In fact, there's a beautiful letter. His name was, I've forgotten the first name, but it's from the Gozlan family. He was one of the Muhtars of the village. he actually protected some of the Jews in the pogroms of 1928-29, and a letter that was written to him of thanks afterwards was used by the son after 67 as proof that he's a good, so to speak, Arab that's got good history and dealings with the Jews. Can he maybe come and live back in Jerusalem at some point? And he used that letter that was written at the time after the 20s.
Wow.
But the Jews were still driven out, notwithstanding a few Arabs that were, rather friendly. Some were driven out, and of course the tragedy was in 1938.
So
the British.
This village to me is always it's been a sort of symbol in my mind of, almost the British letter, kind of declaring them as refugees.
I carry them in 24 hours a day.
I know you carry it all the time.
Not because of this interview.
And what's powerful about this is it's sort of a slip that the British government, it's almost like they didn't intend it, but they in their cultural norms, they had to write this letter, and it sort of de facto cements right there. I'm sure about that. Read it, but it's very powerful, sort of poignant kind of memory of the fact that there was an authentic Jewish village that was wiped out, and the British are admitting.
Correct.
That were refugees. And this whole line that the Arabs are refugees all these years, and this sort of just kind of throws that in many, many ways under the bus. And by accident. They clearly didn't intend it. We understand how they did across the old city in terms of allowing Arab rights to persist, and almost sometimes inciting them to force Jews out of their homes. And there's no difference here, 1938, 1936, 1920s. It was in stages, right? The Yemenite village. It was just like everywhere else. And this to me is just a powerful.
Well, it's their recognition that it's not Silwan. It's effectively saying this is Kfar Temanim in Shiloach. The Jews built a neighborhood. They have, as refugees, the right to be able to return to their homes in their neighborhood. This is a British promise from the British High Commissioner in August of 1938. Of course, 1 year later, the very famous picture, because of course the British were meant to not only look after the Jewish homes, but including also the synagogues, the Beit Knesset. And this is the year later where Rechavam Ze'evi's father is standing in the Beit Knesset, and everything has been destroyed. It's burnt, it's torn, letters of protest are written to the British. Why aren't the Jews returning? Why didn't you look after the Beit Knesset? And it took 70 years later before Ateret Cohanim finally in 2004 basically said, listen, we have rights. This is the heart of Jerusalem. It was an old Yemenite village. We have rights to be able to go there without even using the courts. The courts is another system of the last few years, but in the first few years it's basically Arabs selling, Jews buying. Today, thank God, there are 22 Jewish families now living in 6 buildings and the original Beit Knesset.
Yeah, I want to touch this on the redemptive part of the story, because we've talked a lot about the chamor, the donkey that kicks forward and kicks back and
sits down sometimes.
We've seen the old city a lot. I was just taking a tour there yesterday, and I like to think that what's going on El Haladeh Street, the heart of the old Jewish quarter, is this sort of kind of movement forward, but 90 years ago, the Jews must have thought the same thing. Wow, what's going on? It's amazing. We're not ever getting kicked out of here, and please God, it shouldn't happen again. But they did get kicked out. And so the donkey moves back and forth. It sits down, like you said, and so we're back now. And some of the things that Ateret Cohanim are doing is just tremendously powerful. I remember a few years ago, he invited me to the morning when we moved into Beit Rachel, and it's giant building, and that's just one building. And it's happening at a rapid pace, much faster than I think that people thought would happen there. And so just give us an idea of...
Well, the neighborhood is very hostile, for a start.
For sure.
So because of a number of very violent and hostile clans that are known by the police, even hostile towards certain Arab families, it has been very difficult to buy property. There's a lot of pressure on the Arabs, if not just the edicts forbidding selling, but there are eyes painted all over massive buildings, huge graffiti. We're looking at you. The Waqf, the PA, Hamas, the Arab world.
Amim,
even the left wing. Where we're all looking and seeing what you're doing. Don't sell. So acquisitions is harder, but thank God, there's no shortage of Arabs still willing to sell, and in the last few years, it's in fact even become safer. I'm not talking about since the Trump plan, but in the last few years it's become safer because we've doubled our presence. We went from 2 buildings and 9 families to, in the last 3 years, to 6 buildings and 22 families. And of course the Beit Knesset, which is like the icing on the cake that has been redeemed.
The Beit Knesset, and to me, is a story unto itself. but it does play into the larger what's going on, what's about to happen now is the larger sort of movement back, which people are going to start seeing really. I would say changing the skyline of that area. It seems to be in the offing.
I'm not sure whether we have the time in this particular interview to talk about it, but because the Beit Knesset, the synagogue, is back in Jewish hands, and that was really only because the Supreme Court of Israel ruled that it was a synagogue and it was one part of a larger sanctified trust of the Yemenite community. And that basically opened up, it's not just the synagogue, there's actually 30 other buildings, 600 to 700 Arabs as illegal squatters living in other buildings. Now, Arabs were offered money and they're still going to be offered money even though one could rely on the courts. The trust can rely on the courts. And those cases are slowly but surely unfolding. Just in the last 2 weeks, there's been 3 favourable court rulings on 3 different buildings within the Hekdesh, the Sanctified Trust, around the Beit Knesset, but maybe that's for another time, I'm not sure.
It could be. The key point here, though, is that that they try to appeal to the courts. By losing the court case, they could have taken money and left, right? We offer them plenty of money. Just like there's 3 domes. Just so the viewers understand, the synagogue is a 3-dome structure,
of which none of them could be seen. We only could see one of the domes at the very beginning, 15 odd years ago. And
that was the dome that you paid. They did accept money. That family, right?
I can't go into the details of it, but there were some families that understood where things were going, and arrangements were made. The problem was there were some families living in the majority of the premises, and that had to go to the court. And since then, of course, between the government putting money in and private individuals, we've now taken away all the illegal building, and you and I have seen those 3 domes exposing the original Beit Knesset that was just hidden away. So not only have we returned home to the Shiloach, but we've gone back to the original Beit Knesset. And for the people who are living there today, including a few Yemenite families who have connections, the original Yemenites, for them to pray in the same synagogue that someone from their family prayed before they were kicked out of is something exceptional.
So what's the next stages now? What is the Cohanim planning on doing in that area, aside from the court cases? What are the next sort of people?
Well, there's the legal side of things, that's the Hekdesh specifically, the Sanctified Trust. Obviously, we have an interest in what's taking place, but it's the Sanctified Trust which is physically, involved. There are Arabs who are willing to sell. There are people around the world that can invest in order to add Jewish life to the areas. We have properties that we can develop. We have even empty spaces that can be renovated and added families. But of course, the main project at the moment is developing and restoring the old synagogue. Government's putting down tremendously because it's a heritage site, $1 million, but it's a $3.5 million project. So we need a lot more in order to develop that synagogue, the Beit Knesset, with a magnificent scenic outlook. It'll be a cultural centre also for a Yemenite Jewry. The shul in Bal Harbour is putting down, has pledged $500,000. So if we can get other synagogues or individuals to pledge, then so that's the shul of Bal Harbour. We call this the shul of Shiloach. God willing.
Very nice. And just politically, geopolitically, so people understand the Yemenite village. We were talking about Kidbat Sion last week. Kidmat Sion it really blocks the corridor into the...
That's the eastern edge. You've got Kidmat Sion, the Mounds of Olives, and then below the Mount of Olives is the old Yemenite village in the city of David, which is today a separate and wonderful organisation, but no longer under the auspices of the
Yemenite village, what is the geopolitical effect, besides the historical and the redemptive effect, just pure geopolitics in terms of building it back up, ensuring there's no Palestinian Arab continuity?
I don't want to say ever, and the truth is, Ateret doesn't act in order to stymie, stop, or limit any peace process, or to stop any Arab continuity. It happens to be a nice byproduct, but the main focus of Ateret is all on the positive. We want Jewish life, Jews that have a right, natural, historical, and moral, and ethical, obviously, to be able to buy and to live in any Jewish neighbourhood in the heart of Jerusalem, especially a neighbourhood they were kicked out of. Does it have ramifications by having these special facts on the ground in the corridor or the Holy Basin? For sure it does. The 1,000 Jews living in the old Jewish quarter, 85 families living in the city of David, now 22 families and a lot more hopefully in the Yemenite village, 100 plus families on the Mount of Olives, and eventually the future Jewish neighbourhood. It's all part of the shield of Jerusalem, but it's not done only to shield or suspend any division. It's a nice and wonderful and correct byproduct. We're correcting a lot of injustices done to the Jews that were here, whether it be those thrown out. And that's why I say, from a historical and ethical point of view, it makes a lot of sense. And Jews have the right to be able to live anywhere, side by side with Arabs, under Jewish sovereignty, obviously. But that's another issue, how the coexistence works under Jewish sovereignty.
That's right. Ultimately, just one more point is everything we're doing really is about coexistence. The media likes to flip it around, and the left likes to flip it around. But what the left's trying to do is break apart coexistence by separating, creating boundaries.
Them over there, us over
that's
here.
Right. So the irony of the whole thing is really the opposite, right? The right or the people that are pioneers are actually forcing the idea of coexistence out to the forefront. And we all know that these neighborhoods, after some time, become much more peaceful, become much more safe for all sides, right?
Yeah.
Because the bad actors are basically essentially...
It's only basic coexistence. I don't want to pretend or let any of the listeners believe that it's neither the Arab world, Muslim world, or the Jews want to have, intermarriage. It's your own identities and culture. Basic coexistence, but under Jewish sovereignty. It's great for the Jews, and also it's good for the Arabs. And they appreciate it.
We've seen it in the Yemenite village. We've seen it where when we've walked in before, in the old days, where roads were broken apart, and you can't get basic things going on in there. And because the Jews and Arabs in the area, some of them got together, they brought actual more renovations and more, and the streets were fixed up.
Investment. We're basically we're schlepping along. We're bringing with us sovereignty. A place where there maybe wasn't municipal investment or government investment, a place where there was no police inspectors, there was no police, there was no traffic inspectors, there was no municipal work. Today that is happening in these places, which is good for the Arabs and good for the Jews. There has to be investment at all levels in all these areas, because ultimately you divide the city. So in many ways, where our basic coexistence and our work is only helping a better life for everyone who's there, but under Jewish sovereignty.
All right, Daniel, it's all for today. Let's live.